everyone. I am Uriah Heep, and this is the Great American Novel Series brought to you by the Author's Matrix. In tonight's episode, we'll be going on to chapter 24 of The Village Idiot. Poor Nigel. He wanders the streets of London, his life in tatters, while Dr. Higgins plots his takeover of the university. Quite a dilemma. Where do we go from here? Let's find out. Chapter 24 of The Village Idiot.
Chapter 24. It was a cold, bitter morning, following Nigel's previous conversation with Fiona. He arose early, dressed, and left the house empty-handed. All the food in the house remained under the control of Fiona and was tainted with raw sewage from the trench outside their flat. Nigel could not yield to that stench anymore. He had put aside his desire for pure, clean water years ago. He suffered eating the food his wife had cooked, all laced with fecal matter, to live like everyone else and elevate his budding academic career. That sacrifice garnered him great praise in the scientific world and helped to advance his career. As he rose through the ranks in academia, he knew that had he been seen drinking pure, cleansed water, he would have been a piranha in higher education, and his career would have been ruined. As he had hidden his past from Fiona, there was no way for him to continue purifying water for his family's consumption, so he was resigned to resuming drinking, bathing, and cooking with raw sewage all these years. This choice had wreaked havoc on his body and soul. He now felt like a fraud of the most despicable kind. He thought he sold his soul and received nothing in return but misery and grief. His career, if he could save it, was permanently damaged, and his family now saw him as a lunatic. Nigel roamed around central London in the morning in the mist and chill. He walked neighbourhood after neighbourhood, and at every turn, he witnessed the decimation of humanity writ large before him. Along each lane was the open sewage trench, where the locals obtained their daily helping of raw sewage, unbeknownst to them of the horrific effect the consumption of such rot had on their lives. Am I wrong? Nigel thought to himself as he trudged along. If everyone in the world seems to welcome this horrid sewage that I see as against our very lives, could it be that I have been deluded all along? This thought seemed to Nigel as madness itself. Why was I cursed to see what no one else can see? He asked himself repeatedly. As he sat on a park bench, the mist had turned sharper, and the chill in the air grew more uncomfortable. Nigel thought back to his years at the university and his study with Addison Way. He had made a compromise that he had paid dearly for when his suspension from his studies, due to the science symposium, caused him to make a long-regretted decision. What if I had been one way about my opinion of Addison and his life's work? Nigel thought to himself. Would my life have been wrought with such pain as I endure today? As Nigel sat alone on that park bench, Dr. Higgins felt like royalty at the University of London this morning. He had arrived early and made the rounds of the other professors' offices in the science department, glad-handing every one of them as he lobbied for Nigel's position, which he was sure was not recoverable by him now. You know, Billingsworth, Dr. Higgins whispered to his colleague, I knew all along that Crumbly was an odd duck. I knew it from the moment he strutted onto our esteemed university. Quite, agreed the professor. To think it would be the water of all things that would dash his university career against the proverbial rocks, Higgins. That's the rub, Billingsworth, Dr. Higgins continued unabated. Why would such a so-called boy genius in our midst go off on some cockeyed notion? My research into his secret past showed that he didn't just embrace this wild notion about water in a vacuum. Some clever fraudster led him. Well, rejoined Dr. Billingsworth, he was an impetuous youth then. Indeed, that must be taken into consideration. Dr. Higgins felt he had just pushed too hard on his colleague. He wanted to lead his fellow faculty members down his path toward Nigel's destruction, but he realized he had to proceed cautiously at that moment. Quite, agreed Dr. Higgins, and he managed to get past those youthful, fanciful delusions of his early university days. Certainly, That would weigh heavily in his favour. Dr. Billingsworth paused thoughtfully at Dr. Higgins's response. However, Billingsworth, Dr. Higgins continued, allowing the pause, it was only a few days ago that Crumbly reiterated his beliefs right there in his office. Disgraceful indeed. That statement struck Dr. Billingsworth hard. Quite a dilemma, Higgins. Indeed, Professor, Dr. Higgins continued, feeling he had his colleague on the ropes. I could not believe my eyes, I am telling you, Billingsworth. I nearly gagged on the crumpets in his office. I knew that I was dealing with a deranged mind, a mind not worthy of holding the most esteemed seat in all the scientific world. I must admit, Higgins, Dr. Billingsworth agreed, you make a compelling case. It was done. Dr. Higgins has converted yet another faculty member to abandon their long-held support for Nigel. He placed his hand on Dr. Billingsworth's shoulder and smiled broadly. I declare, Billingsworth, I do not believe it will be long before Crumbly no longer disgraces this great university with his presence on its hallowed grounds. It would be an insult to every faculty member and every student to have a heretic among our ranks. Who would yearn to study here amongst the future generations of students, knowing we kowtowed to a lunatic and allowed him to spout his nonsensical theories about water, of all things? We would all be laughed out of the academic world. Just think of what our colleagues would say about us behind closed doors. I shudder. Quite, rejoined Dr. Billingsworth. After gracefully excusing himself, Dr. Higgins was finished with the professor and off down the grand hallway searching for another catch. As Dr. Higgins was glad-handing one colleague after another, Nigel remained out of doors, wandering about London, lost in his thoughts. As he walked about aimlessly, he came upon a young child, perhaps a year or two older than his eldest daughter, Iona, sitting upon the curb, vomiting intensely. Behind the little boy was an open sewer trench where hot, bubbling sewage water was overflowing its banks and filling the street with its horrid stench. The smell overwhelmed Nigel as he gripped his nose to quell the nausea welling up in him. He knew there was nothing he could do to assist that little boy, and he attempted none. He just stared as he watched the boy choking on his vomit. Certainly, Nigel had felt helpless before, but this time was different. His hopes of telling the world about the value of clean, purified water contrasted with the fact that the raw sewage water everyone consumes daily is inimical to oneself had been dashed by Dr. Higgins. A woman approached the little boy, evidently his mum, and patted him on the back with vigour, hoping to ease the boy back to health and dislodge the chunks of fecal matter stuck in the boy's throat for some time now. Nigel watched as the boy upchucked copious amounts of raw sewage and was restored by his mum's quick actions. As the boy was gathered up by his mum, she looked up and stared at Nigel for a brief moment. The realization that a child was suffering in front of his eyes, and Nigel had not cared to intervene, struck the boy's mother. She grabbed the child, held him close to her breast, and whisked him away, looking back at Nigel with scorn only a mother could show when confronted with the likes of another person who wished to do her child harm. I would have helped, Nigel attempted to say as the distance between the mother and her child rapidly increased. I didn't wish to see the boy suffer, he yelled to no avail. She was gone. She vanished around the next corner, never to be seen by the likes of Nigel forevermore. Could have given him a slap on the back, Governor, said a passerby who had witnessed the entire scene. I would have been a bit closer, but my gout prevented me from initiating a rescue. But you, sir, just watch the boy suffer. Nigel turned to the stranger, appalled by his attack on his character. Who are you, sir? Asked Nigel to the elderly gentleman who now stood abreast to him on his chilly London morning. To disparage my character. Who am I, sir? The elderly man said with his voice rising. I am the one who watched your deep indifference to the sufferings of a fellow creature. A tiny little creature at that. Nigel was startled at the accusation by this stranger. Was it true what the elderly gentleman had just accused Nigel of on that London street? Nigel repeatedly asked himself whether that man was correct about his character. He had stood by as that little urchin suffered, choking on his fecal-laced vomit. Why didn't I assist that poor little boy? Nigel asked himself as he continued his lonely walk that morning. What obligation do I have to my fellow creatures? Nigel asked himself before deciding he must find that little boy and his mum to express his deepest sympathies for his suffering and beg for his mum's forgiveness. He took off running down the street and turning the same corner where the mum and her son had just disappeared, but saw no one on the street. The street was dingy and dirty, with a clogged sewer trench that had overflowed into the street. Nigel found himself up to his ankles in raw sewage and stopped cold. "Aye, mister," a voice called out to him from somewhere. "Is it I who you are looking for?" Nigel turned around and looked about him but saw no one. A woman's voice called again. "Are you looking for me and my son, mister?" Nigel attempted to extricate himself from the toxic sludge around his feet and made his way backward to the safety of cobblestone that had escaped the overflow from the trench. As he kicked the chunks of sewage off his shoes, he heard the voice again exclaim, "We're up here, sir." Nigel looked up to the second floor of the weathered old flat before him and saw the woman staring down at him, holding the boy in her arms. The child was too old to be carried by his mum, but in his emaciated state, there was little to carry, so carry him she did. Nigel waved at the mum and asked if he could speak with her to offer her his apologies. She declined his offer and slammed her window shut while holding her son close. Moments later, the flat's front door was flung open, and there she appeared, still carrying the little boy on her hip. "It is I who you wish to offer your apologies, sir. Why should I grant you that privilege?" Nigel was surprised to see the woman again after her hasty dismissal at the window only moments ago. Perhaps, Nigel thought, the woman has had a change of heart. A change of heart she did not have, but agreed to hear Nigel's case. She motioned Nigel to follow her and disappeared inside. Nigel made his way up the rickety stairs and meekly entered the flat. It was dark, musty, and smelled of sewage. The flat had only a few rooms on the first floor, and a stairwell leading up to the room where the woman had first witnessed Nigel walking down her street. "Sit, sir," were the rough words that came out of her mouth as she beckoned Nigel to join her in their receiving room. That room was small and cramped, with a single couch for guests standing on rotted legs. There were a series of tiers in the cushions, whose days of providing some comfort to those who sat upon it had long since passed, and which made it uncomfortable to sit upon. But Nigel did. Nigel sat down on the couch and coughed. "Well, Mum," he began, "I am afraid I froze when I witnessed the suffering of your little boy. I should have come to his aid. I did not see you about it, and it was my duty as a citizen to help." With little effort, the woman shifted her child from one knee to another. "Are you someone who just doesn't care about his fellow creatures, sir?" she asked, still bitter. Nigel felt the sting of that rebuke and coughed again. "Madam," he implored, "it is not I who feels not for his fellow man, I can assure you. I regret not helping your little boy. For that, I deserve your criticism. I shall have you know, madam, that I have worked my entire life for the betterment of our fellow man." Now, Nigel was disturbed, and it showed. "I have sought you to express my regrets, but you choose to assault me. Why do you insist on punishing me further? I am here, am I not?" The hardness of the woman faded, and a tear appeared which rolled down her sunken cheek, not unnoticed by Nigel. "What is it, madam?" he implored. His anger at this poor woman turned to abject pity. The woman wiped the tear from her cheek and smiled painfully at Nigel. She was alone in the world, and now this gentleman was in her humble home, speaking with her and expressing his regret. This had never happened to her before. She was invisible. She was a poor widow raising her only son in this stench-filled flat. After a moment's pause, she gathered the courage to speak to his gentleman more directly. "I am a widow, sir," she began. "I live here in this flat with my son. This is all we have in the world. My husband, as much as I hated him, is dead." Nigel was stunned at her honesty. "I am so sorry to hear that," he replied. The woman waved him off. "It is better that he is dead. God was kind in relieving us of him." Nigel shifted uncomfortably on the couch once again, but did not cough. "As you can see, my son is dying too," the woman said coldly. "He does not eat anymore, not for days now. I scoop up enough raw sewage to cook, but he still resists. I even scoop more than my fair share from the trench outside to give him more nourishment. But he cannot keep it down. That is what he was doing outside our flat when you found him. I thought he might regain his health if he just ate the sewage. I ran back to our flat to look for something to stop his vomiting, but our cupboard was bare. I had nothing to give him. That is when I saw you staring at him upon my return to the street. I was angry that you had stood there and watched him leave without a look of concern on your face. I am sorry, sir." Nigel was touched by this woman's tale more than he had expected, and he gracefully wiped away a few tears that welled up in his eyes. "What is your son's name, madam?" "His name is Archie, sir," replied the woman as she hugged her son. "And you feed him the raw sewage that flows in the trench outside your flat?" Nigel asked politely. "That is a strange question, sir," the woman replied. "Of course, sir. What else would I prepare our meagre meals with?" Nigel thought momentarily and pondered the difficulty of telling this poor, helpless woman that the very sewage water was making her son so ill. Of course, he knew that, but no one else in the world did, save a few. He had been rebuffed so often when he told others this truth that he hesitated. Should I strive once again to tell this poor creature, mired in poverty, feeding her only son with the rancid water gathered outside her flat, that she is slowly bringing him closer to his grave? The woman put her son on the floor and wiped some raw sewage off his clothes. "We could have eaten that!" she exclaimed, laughing out loud. "Madam," Nigel said, "what would you say if science and society have had it all wrong all along?" "Wrong about what, sir?" Nigel summoned the courage. "The very water we drink, cook, and bathe with. This sewage water is the bane of our existence. It is toxic. It is poison to our very lives. This is what is hurting little Archie so much." The woman pulled Archie back onto her lap and kissed him gently on his sunken cheek. "I do not know what you are speaking of, sir. It does not make any sense to me." Now that he had breached the subject, Nigel told the woman about the true nature of water and how mankind should only consume pure, clean water, with all toxins removed. She listened intently at first, but soon her attention began to wane. Nigel was familiar with her reaction, and it was the reaction he feared the most when speaking with someone about the true nature of water. If your little Archie were to drink pure, freshly clean water, and not the sewage water that flows in the trenches outside your flat, his health would be restored. The woman once again kissed her dying son on his cheek and put him down on the bare floor. After brushing his hair with her emaciated hand, thus releasing chunks of little Archie's hair from his scalp, she looked up at Nigel and smiled faintly. "Sir, I am afraid I do not understand a word of what you just said." After a pause, she continued, "We drink and cook what little food we have with the sewer water that flows freely outside our door. We are blessed that such amounts of fecal matter are so close to us every day. We cannot live without its sustenance, I assure you. We pay nothing for it and take as much as we like. Why do you condemn us for it?" "It is not I, madam," Nigel rejoined, "that condemns you or anyone else for the consumption of raw sewage, but warns you that it is that very consumption that is calling your son to his grave. I have seen much in this world, madam, and the sewage water you drink daily is toxic to our very selves. And how is it that you, a stranger to me and my son, know all this? The woman asked somewhat defiantly. I am not a fool like you suppose, sir. I see you for what you are. You are not kind at all. Her anger rising, the woman continued. First, you stand by idly, watching my son suffer and do nothing, and now you come into my house and talk nonsense that my head is throbbing. Who are you? Nigel realized that what he was trying to tell this woman, she would never hear. As her tirade against him continued and grew in intensity, his thoughts drifted back to his youth when he studied with Addison Way. He was warned by his friend and mentor that people did not want to learn something significant from something that did not have sufficient prestige to make them important. He saw that this was true. Here was this wretch sitting before him, her son dying from the continuous consumption of toxic raw sewage, and yet she was attacking him for telling her the truth about why her son's life was slipping away. As he had told her about how fresh, clean, pure water was what every person craved and would restore her son's fragile health. The silence surrounding those facts he uttered overwhelmed her and prevented her from happily yielding to the truth of what he was saying. How could she hear me? Nigel thought. If the entire world says something completely different from what I am saying. The woman continued to rage at Nigel, now cursing him and demanding he leave her hovel at once. In a moment, he found himself out on the street, alone again, with nowhere to go. As he trudged down the lonely lane, hands thrust in his pockets, he wondered whether it was all worth it. Why was I the person in human history to know what I know? Why was I cursed with this knowledge that could do humanity so much eternal good, yet not have it welcomed by anyone? That cursed woman railed at me for telling her that her son is dying from the raw sewage she feeds him every day, and she is angry with me.
So, poor Nigel. He's even more isolated from the whole world because he knows something that nobody else knows. It seems so clear to him, but no one can welcome the news. So, where does he go from here? We'll find out in the next chapter 25. For now, goodbye, good luck, and we'll see you next time for the next chapter of The Village Idiot. Good night.